Hey guys, glad you could make it. Tonight we're heading north, back to the age of the Vikings. But forget the horned helmets. They didn't wear them. And forget the glorious, sun-drenched raids for just a moment. We're going to talk about the other half of their lives. The long, dark, cold, and brutally difficult part they don't make epic poems about. We're heading into the heart of a Scandinavian winter to face the harsh reality these fearsome warriors endured just to see the spring. If these slow journeys into the chillier parts of the past help you find a moment of quiet reflection in your own, hopefully warmer world, a simple like or subscribe is always appreciated. It's a quiet way to help our little community grow. And as always, it's wonderful to see where everyone is tuning in from. Our shared history stretches across the globe, so feel free to share what part of the world you're listening from tonight as you settle in. Alright, it's time to let the day fade away. Find that comfortable spot, let your shoulders relax, let your breathing slow down. Take a long, slow breath, feel the stillness, and just let it all out. Feel the noise of the day just melt away. Good. The year is around 900 AD. The place is a small farmstead, a Garda, nestled deep in a Norwegian fjord, a long finger of dark water cutting between towering sheer cliffs. You are Ragnar, not the legendary king of sagas, just Ragnar, a Carl, a free farmer. You are a husband, a father to several younger members of the household, a master of this small patch of hard-won land. And the air is changing. You feel it in your bones, a deep, penetrating chill that the summer sun seems powerless to fight. Summer was a blur, a frantic race against time, planting the precious barley in the stony fields, coaxing life from the short growing season, fishing endlessly in the rich fjord waters, hauling nets heavy with herring and cod, hunting in the high forests that cling to the steep slopes, hoping for deer or elk, mending the sturdy timbers of your longship after its last voyage. Perhaps you even sailed west across the grey heaving sea, a quick profitable trip to Lindisfarne or York, returning with silver arm rings and less tangible souvenirs. But that season of outward bound energy is over. Now, the days are visibly shrinking. Each morning the sun climbs a little later, a little lower over the southern ridge. Each evening it dips behind the western cliffs sooner, plunging the fjord into a deep, cold twilight that lasts longer and longer. A sharp, relentless wind whistles down from the high peaks, peaks already dusted with the first ominous white of snow. It carries the clean, sharp scent of pine needles and the unmistakable metallic tang of ice. The vibrant greens of summer have faded to dull browns and yellows. The rowan trees burn a brief, defiant red, their berries a final offering before the frost claims them. The sun itself seems weary, a pale, watery disk hanging low in the sky. Its light thin and weak, offering little warmth, more a reminder of the heat now lost. Winter, the Veta, is not just coming, it is breathing down your neck. You pull your thick wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. The work is not done. In fact, the real work, the work of survival, is just beginning. You must be ready. Failure is not an option. Your home is not a stone castle with high towers. It is a longhouse, a skali. It dominates your small farmstead, a long, low, sturdy structure, perhaps 60 feet in length. It's built of thick, rough-hewn timber planks, felled from the surrounding forest, fitted tightly together to keep out the wind. Or perhaps, if timber is scarcer, its walls are thick turf blocks, cut from the earth, laid over a frame of stone and wood. It is built to endure. The building is slightly curved, like the hull of an overturned ship, a a design born of experience, meant to shed the crushing weight of winter snows and resist the tearing force of the wind. The roof is thick, insulating turf laid over birch bark, green and alive in the brief summer, now fading to a dormant brown, looking almost like the flank of some great sleeping beast settled into the landscape. There are no windows in the modern sense, just a few small square openings cut high up under the eaves, perhaps covered with thin, stretched, oiled animal membrane, fish skin or gut, which lets in a dim, grey, translucent light, but keeps out the worst of the wind and snow, and a single sturdy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, facing away from the prevailing wind. This building, this single large room, will be your entire physical world, your ark against the frozen flood, for the next 5, maybe 6 long, dark months. You stand outside the sturdy wooden door, breathing in the sharp, clean air. You look out over the fjord. It is your highway to the world, the source of much of your food, your connection to other settlements, your escape route. Now its surface is a dark, choppy grey-green, restless under the insistent wind. Whitecaps flash near the far shore, but you know its volatile freedom is temporary. Soon, perhaps after the first truly bitter nights, the isolog will begin. The ice laying. A thin grey skin will form in the sheltered coves, creeping outwards day by day. The water near the shore will still thicken, grow slushy, then finally freeze solid. A silent, inexorable process, locking your farmstead in a grip of white silence, sealing the water road until the distant spring thaw. The longship, your sleek, dragon-proud vessel, your pride and joy, the tool of summer adventure and trade. It has already been hauled ashore. You and the other men of the farm strained, pulling it high up onto heavy wooden rollers, far above the reach of the highest winter tides or ice flows. Now it rests under a protective covering of greased hides, a sleeping predator dreaming of warmer seas. Its sailing days are definitively over until spring melts the ice. Your world, once stretching across the sea, is rapidly shrinking to the confines of this narrow valley, this small patch of land between the cliffs and the soon-to-be frozen water. Inside the Longhouse, the activity is just as frantic as the final harvesting outside. Your wife, Astrid, her face serious, moves with purpose through the dim interior. She and the other female members of the household, perhaps an older female relative, a younger woman helping with chores, are checking the stores, the precious hoard that must last until the land wakes again. This is the brutal reality number 1. In winter, you eat what you gathered and preserved in summer and autumn. There are no winter markets just down the road, no trading ships arriving with fresh supplies. What you have now is all you will have. Astrid runs her hand down the rough wooden staves of a large barrel filled with salted fish, herring, cod, caught in vast numbers during the summer runs, gutted and packed layer upon layer in coarse grey sea salt. Another barrel holds pickled vegetables, turnips perhaps, or cabbage, fermented in brine. From the dark, smoky rafters hang sides of smoked mutton or goat, slaughtered in the autumn, the meat dark, greasy and pungent, preserved by the same smoke that now fills the air you breathe. Maybe there are strings of dried mushrooms, gathered from the forest floor, and hard, wrinkled apples stored carefully in straw-lined chests. And most crucial of all, the grain. Heavy, woven sacks or sturdy wooden chests hold the barley, harvested with back-breaking effort, threshed and winnowed. This is the staple, the core of your winter diet, the source of your bread and your porridge and your ale. Astrid carefully checks the lids. ensuring they are tight against the ever-present threat of rats and mice, creatures who also seek shelter and sustenance in the Longhouse during the cold months. Every handful of grain is precious. Every spoiled fish, every mouldy turnip is a small disaster. You look at the stores, piled in the cooler, darker end of the Longhouse. It looks like a lot, but you know how quickly it can dwindle during the long, hungry darkness. Is it enough? You can only hope. You have done all you can. Now you must trust your preparations, and ration carefully. You step outside again, into the grey afternoon light, and check on the animals. Your few precious cows, small, hardy beasts, huddled together near the Longhouse wall, their breath misting in the cold air. Your handful of shaggy, incredibly resilient sheep, their fleece thick and oily, graze stoically on the last remnants of tough, brown autumn grass in the home field. A few noisy goats clamber on a rocky outcrop nearby. These animals are your walking larder, your source of milk, wool, and occasionally precious meat. They are vital to your survival, but they too cannot endure the full fury of the coming winter unprotected. Soon, very soon, they will have to join you inside. You look towards the large, distinct section built onto one end of the Longhouse. The floor there is lower than the main human living area, simply packed earth covered with a thick layer of straw and bracken. The walls might be less carefully finished. This is the byre, the barn, integrated directly into your home. Your livestock, the cows, the sheep, perhaps even a couple of hardy northern ponies if you are prosperous, will spend the deepest winter months with you, under the same long turf roof. This arrangement serves multiple purposes. It protects the valuable animals from the worst of the cold and from predators like wolves that might be driven down from the mountains by hunger. It allows for easier feeding and milking during heavy snow. And, perhaps most importantly for you, it provides heat. Animal body heat, trapped within the shared space, is a significant and free source of warmth in the frozen north. It's a primitive form of central heating. It also means, inescapably, that your house for the next 5 months will smell permanently and powerfully of, well, barn, of manure, of damp animal bodies, of stale straw. It's a smell you grew up with. It's the smell of winter survival. Then, one morning, you wake differently. Not to the low light filtering through the smoke hole, but to stillness. An unusual, heavy, profound silence. The usual sounds, the wind whistling under the eaves, the distant cry of a seabird, the bleating of sheep outside, are gone, muffled. You swing your legs off the sleeping platform, your feet landing on the cold floor. You walk to the heavy wooden door. You lift the thick wooden drawbar. You pull the door inwards, bracing against the expected wind. But there is no wind. Just quiet. And white. A thick, soft, utterly pristine blanket of snow covers everything in sight. The packed earth of the farmyard, the brown turf roof of the Longhouse, the stark, skeletal branches of the nearby birch trees, all are softened, rounded, buried under several inches of fresh powder. The air is perfectly still, biting cold, and carries the clean, sharp, metallic scent of frost. The first heavy snowfall of winter has arrived while you slept. It is, in its way, breathtaking. The world transformed into a simpler, quieter, more elemental state. The familiar landscape is rendered strange, magical, contours softened, imperfections hidden. It possesses a stark, intimidating beauty. It is also a wall, a soft white wall, but a wall nonetheless. Movement becomes difficult, paths disappear. The world outside your door is suddenly more challenging, more hostile. You must now wade rather than walk. You must clear paths, dig out access to the woodpile, to the water source. If it hasn't frozen solid yet, the snow is both a blanket and a cage. You step out carefully, your thick leather boots sinking deep into the fresh powder with a soft crunch. You wade towards the edge of the low cliff overlooking the fjord. You look down. Overnight, the dark, restless water has undergone a profound change. A thin, grey-white sheet of ice stretches out from the shoreline, reaching like tentative fingers towards the deeper channel. Near the edges, it looks solid, opaque. Further out, it is still dark, translucent, fragile. The ice laying, has begun in earnest. The fjord is starting to freeze. Within a week, maybe 2, depending on the severity of the cold, the entire fjord, miles long and hundreds of feet deep, will be frozen solid, a vast, white, silent highway of ice. It creates possibilities, crossing directly to the other side, perhaps easier ice fishing. But it definitively ends the season of the sea. Your isolation, already deepening with the snow, is now almost complete. Your farmstead, your small cluster of buildings and fields, is truly an island adrift in a sea of white. The rhythm of life now shifts entirely indoors, dictated by the demands of survival. The first and most crucial task every single morning, performed in the pre-dawn darkness, is tending the fire. In the centre of the Longhouse's main living area runs a long, shallow, stone-lined pit, perhaps 10 or 15 feet in length. This is the hearth, the Arin. It is the heart of the house, the source of all warmth and light. It was carefully banked with ash the night before to keep the embers alive. Allowing the fire to die completely overnight would be a minor disaster. Relighting it with friction or flint and steel in the damp cold is difficult and time-consuming. Now, in the deep chill before sunrise, you or Astrid must kneel beside the hearth. You gently scrape away the grey ash, revealing the dull red glow of the embers beneath. You blow softly, steadily, coaxing the embers back to life. A tiny flame flickers. You feed it carefully. A handful of dry moss, paper-thin curls of birch bark shaved with a knife, then small dry twigs, arranged precisely to allow airflow. Only when the kindling is burning well do you add larger pieces of split firewood, pine, birch, maybe oak if you are lucky. Wood is life. You spent weeks, perhaps months, in the late summer and autumn engaged in the relentless labour of chopping and stacking firewood, felling trees in the steep surrounding forests, hauling the logs down to the farmstead, splitting them with iron wedges and mallets, stacking the cords high against the longhouse walls, hoping, praying, you have enough to last the long, hungry months of winter. Running out of firewood is not just an inconvenience. It is unthinkable. It means the hearth goes cold. It means freezing in the perpetual darkness. It means raw food, or no cooked food at all. It means death. Every log is precious, counted, rationed. The fire catches properly now, flames licking higher, beginning to push back the bone-chilling cold in the immediate vicinity of the hearth. It casts a warm, flickering orange glow on the rough timber walls and the faces huddled nearby. But with the light and warmth comes the smoke. There is no chimney, no flue as we would recognize it. There is simply a hole, or maybe 2, cut into the thick turf roof, directly above the long central hearth. Theoretically, the smoke rises and finds its way out through these openings. The reality is far less efficient. Most of the smoke seems reluctant to leave the relative warmth of the longhouse. It fills the high, vaulted space of the rafters first, swirling in the dim grey light filtering down through the smoke holes. It hangs in the air, a constant, acrid blue-grey haze, thickest near the ceiling, thinner near the floor where people live and sleep. It stings your eyes, making them water constantly. It rasps in your throat. It coats every single surface inside the longhouse. The walls, the roof beams, the wooden benches, your clothes, your hair, even your skin. With a thin, greasy black layer of soot, you have a constant hacking cough throughout the winter months. Everyone does. Your lungs feel perpetually irritated. Respiratory problems are endemic, but it's unavoidable. It is simply the smell of home in winter, the price you pay for warmth. And now, with the snow deep outside and the temperature plummeting, the animals must come inside for good. You push open a smaller secondary door located at the lower, barn end of the longhouse. A blast of frigid air rushes in. You call, you cajole, perhaps you use a staff to gently guide the reluctant cows, their hooves slipping on the threshold. The small flock of shaggy sheep follows, bleating nervously. The stubborn, independent goats might require more forceful encouragement. They are driven into their winter quarters, by a section of the longhouse. They jostle, they shift, their familiar animal complaints echoing strangely within the enclosed space. They find their designated spots in the simple, straw-covered stalls, perhaps separated by low, wooden partitions. Almost immediately, the atmosphere inside the longhouse changes profoundly. The clean, cold, sharp smell of snow carried in on your clothes is quickly overwhelmed by the warm, thick, heavy, pungent smell of livestock. The earthy scent of damp wool and hide. The sweetish, grassy smell of cud being chewed. And the unmistakable ammoniac tang of manure and urine quickly soaking into the straw bedding on the floor. This is the brutal reality number 2. For 5 months, your house is a barn. There might be a low, wooden partition wall separating the main human living area from the animal stalls, offering a slight visual barrier. But there is no escaping the smell, or the sounds, or the flies that might still buzz, even in winter, drawn by the warmth and the manure. You will eat your meals just feet away from a cow relieving itself. You will sleep, listening to the rhythmic sound of cows chewing their cud all night, the occasional soft bleat of a sheep, the rustle of animals shifting in their stalls. It is intimate and deeply unsanitary by modern standards, but it is the way. It is the necessary compromise for survival. Privacy is a concept as foreign as sunshine in December. The main human living area of the longhouse is, essentially, one large open room. Running along the length of the walls are raised, wooden platforms, perhaps 2 or 3 feet off the cold, packed earth floor. These wide benches are covered with layers of straw for insulation, and then thick, rough wool blankets or heavy furs, sheepskin, goatskin, maybe even wolf or bear pelts if your hunting was successful. These platforms serve a dual purpose. During the short, dim days, they are where people sit. Women weaving or spinning, men carving wood or mending tools. At night, they become the communal beds. Your entire family, you, Astrid, perhaps an aging parent, several younger members of the household, maybe even a couple of farmhands or thralls. If your farmstead is large enough, all sleep here, side by side. You simply lie down on the platform, pull the heavy furs over you, and huddle together for warmth against the bitter cold that radiates from the walls and floor. There are no separate rooms, no dividing walls beyond perhaps a hanging curtain of wool or hide for the master and mistress of the house at one end. Everything happens in this single shared space. Eating, sleeping, working, arguing, laughing, giving birth, dying. Life is lived entirely in public within the small community of the household. It requires a certain tolerance for lack of personal space, for constant noise, for the smells and functions of other human beings. It is communal living, taken to its absolute extreme. A noisy, smoky, smelly, but vital human huddle against the vast, cold indifference of the northern winter. The dimness inside the Longhouse is constant, almost liquid. Even at midday, with the pale sun at its highest, the light filtering down through the smoke holes in the roof and the few small, translucent, membrane-covered openings high on the walls is weak, grey and diffuse. It illuminates the area directly under the smoke holes relatively well, leaving the rest of the Longhouse, especially the ends and the areas along the walls, in deep shadow. After the sun sets, which happens shockingly early in the deep winter, perhaps only a few hours after it rises, the only source of light is the long central fire pit. Its flickering orange flames leap and dance, casting deep, moving shadows that make the familiar space seem strange and alive. The faces of your family, gathered near the hearth, are lit from below, appearing like masks in the wavering light. You might have a few precious lamps to supplement the firelight, especially for close work. These are typically simple, shallow bowls carved from soapstone, a soft, easily worked rock, filled with fish oil or rendered animal fat, tallow. A wick made of dried moss or twisted plant fibre floats in the oil. When lit, these lamps give off a small, sputtering, smoky yellow light. They smell strongly of burning fat or fish. They offer just enough illumination to see the work in your hands, the wood carving, the weaving, or perhaps the face of the person sitting next to you. But they are used sparingly. Oil and fat are valuable commodities needed for cooking and preserving food. Mostly, you live in shadows. Your eyes adapt to the gloom, learning to read shapes and movements in the near darkness. Your world shrinks dramatically, defined by the small, shifting circle of firelight. Outside, the wind howls, a deep, mournful sound as it sweeps across the frozen fjord, or a high-pitched scream as it tears at the eaves of the Longhouse. You hear the sharp crack of freezing timber, the soft thump of snow sliding from the roof. Inside, the air is thick, warm only near the fire and heavy with smoke. It smells powerfully of burning wood, of unwashed wool, of damp earth, of livestock, and of cooking food. Condensation from breath and bodies runs down the cold timber or turf walls, making them perpetually damp. Ice might even form on the inside of the walls furthest from the fire. Your wool clothes, absorbing the moisture from the air, always feel slightly heavy and clammy against your skin. Mould, a creeping grey-green bloom, might grow in the darker, colder corners, on stored leather goods or damp walls. It is cosy, in a primitive, claustrophobic, deeply unsanitary sort of way. It is the necessary hibernation of the north, a retreat into a man-made cave against the elemental fury outside. Food and the preparation of it becomes the central rhythm of the long dark days. Breakfast, eaten shortly after waking in the dim light, is almost invariably porridge. A thick grey steaming gruel made from cracked or coarsely ground barley, boiled slowly with water, or perhaps some skimmed milk, if one of the cows is still giving any in the deep winter. It is bland, heavy, designed to fill the belly and provide slow-burning energy. You might stir in a spoonful of precious honey, carefully hoarded from a wild hive found and raided in the summer. Or perhaps you mix in some dried, reconstituted berries, lingonberries or blueberries, gathered from the hillsides in late autumn, adding a touch of tartness and colour. You eat it from a simple carved wooden bowl, using a wooden spoon. Lunch, if it happens at all, is often just cold leftovers from breakfast porridge, perhaps eaten while working on some indoor task. Or maybe just a piece of hard, dry flatbread, made from barley flour and water, baked earlier on a hot stone or griddle over the fire until crisp. It is hardtack essentially, durable and filling, but requiring strong teeth. You might soften it by dipping it into your ale or into the cooking pot. The evening meal is the main event, the time when the household gathers properly around the fire. Astrid, or another female relative responsible for the cooking, tends the large iron or soapstone cauldron that hangs from a chain over the central fire. Tonight, it is salted cod again. The stiff, grey, salt-encrusted fish has been soaking in a bucket of water for hours, maybe even days, changing the water frequently to leach out the harsh, crystalline salt that preserved it. Now, chunks of the rehydrated fish simmer slowly in the pot, perhaps with some stored root vegetables, tough onions or turnips dug from the storage pit under the floor. If your autumn harvest was good and your stores are holding up, the smell of boiling fish, pungent and slightly ammoniac, fills the smoky air, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and livestock. It is served ladled into your wooden bowls. The fish is chewy. Its texture has been irrevocably changed by the heavy salting and drying. It is still intensely salty despite the soaking, but it is protein. It is essential fuel for warmth and survival. You eat it gratefully, perhaps using pieces of the hard flatbread to scoop it up. Maybe, as a side dish, you have some askir, a thick, tangy, yogurt-like cultured milk product made during the summer when milk was plentiful and stored in wooden barrels, sometimes buried in the cool earth to preserve it. It provides valuable fats and nutrients. And there is always beer, all, brewed in large batches in the autumn after the barley harvest. It is weak by modern standards, cloudy and stored in wooden barrels. By midwinter, it probably tastes a bit sour, perhaps starting to turn. But it provides essential calories and hydration. More importantly, the low alcohol content makes it generally safer to drink than water drawn from potentially frozen or contaminated sources. You drink it from a carved wooden cup passed around the circle, or perhaps, if you are the head of the household, from a polished drinking horn, a symbol of status. You think wistfully of the rich, sweet mead sometimes served at great feasts, but that is a luxury for rare occasions. What about white, fluffy, imported wheat bread? Exotic spices from the south like pepper or cinnamon? Fresh fruit flown in from warmer climes? You would laugh bitterly. That is food for kings in their great halls, or perhaps only for the honoured dead feasting in Valhalla. Your food is functional. It is brown. It is grey. It is salty. It is monotonous. The brutal reality, number 3. Viking winter cuisine was primarily about caloric intake, not culinary delight. Survival trumped seasoning, every time. But winter, despite the cold and darkness, is not a time of complete idleness. You are not bears, sleeping the months away until spring. There is always work to be done. Endless work. Just different work. Shifted indoors. Performed in the dim, smoky firelight. You sit on the wide, wooden bench along the wall. The warmth of the fire on your face. The chill of the outer wall at your back. You take out your tools. Your ever-present iron knife. Small specialized carving axes, spoon bits for gouging hollows, perhaps a simple draw knife. You select a piece of wood, birch maybe, or easily worked pine, saved from your carefully rationed firewood pile, chosen for its straight grain. and you begin to carve. Your hands, calloused and strong from summer farm work, move with practiced skill in the flickering light. You carve a new handle for an axe that split during the intense wood chopping season. You carve replacement teeth for a wooden hay rake. You carve simple, functional wooden bowls and spoons for the household, replacing ones that have cracked or worn out. Perhaps you carve a small, simple toy animal, a horse, a bird, for a younger member of the household, a small moment of play in the serious business of winter. Your hands are almost never still. To be idle is to waste precious time, precious resources. Astrid sits nearby, perhaps on the opposite bench, her hands also constantly busy. She might be spinning wool into yarn, using a simple drop spindle, the whirl turning rhythmically as she draws out the fibres from a mass of cleaned fleece. Or perhaps she's at the loom. The large, upright, warp-weighted loom stands against one wall, a complex structure of wood and thread. The rhythmic clack, thud, clack, thud of the wooden beater bar pushing each new line of weft tightly into place is one of the constant hypnotic sounds of the winter longhouse. She is weaving vadmal, the thick, coarse, durable woolen cloth that makes your tunics, your trousers, your cloaks, your blankets. The wool came from your own sheep, sheared in the spring, washed in the river, a cold job, carded to align the fibres, spun into yarn during the long evenings. The finished cloth is often scratchy, dense, and still smells faintly of sheep due to the natural lanolin oil deliberately left in the wool. This oil makes the vadmal naturally water-resistant, a vital quality in the damp northern climate. It is not fashionable cloth dyed in dull, earthy tones from plants gathered locally. It is utterly functional. It is life-saving insulation against the deadly cold. Astrid weaves yard after slow yard, ensuring the family will have enough cloth for repairs and new garments when spring returns. Other essential tasks fill the dim, slow-moving days. You mend your fishing nets, painstakingly repairing breaks in the hemp or linen cords, your fingers tracing the familiar patterns of the knots in the poor firelight. This net will be crucial for catching the first runs of fish when the fjord ice finally breaks. You repair your sturdy leather boots, stitching on new patches of hide using a sharp bone awl and strong sinew thread. You might take down your shield from where it hangs on the wall. The simple, round, wooden shield, perhaps faced with leather, used primarily for farming tasks or settling unexpected neighbourhood disputes. And check its structure, tightening the leather rim, maybe applying a fresh coat of tallow to waterproof the wood, or repainting its surface with simple patterns. You take your heavy iron axe head, the farmer's indispensable tool for woodcutting, building, and defence, and you sharpen its edge carefully on a whetstone, spitting on the stone, drawing the blade across it again and again, the softer sound barely audible above the crackle of the fire. You are maintaining the essential tools of survival. Every moment spent repairing and preparing now in the enforced idleness of winter is a moment saved when the frantic, exhausting work of spring arrives with the thaw. The darkness, the sheer, relentless physical darkness, it weighs on you. It is not just the absence of light. It feels like a presence, a heavy, cold blanket smothering the world. It is not just the physical dimness inside the smoky longhouse, but the crushing lack of daylight hours outside. In the depths of winter, the sun, if it appears at all, is a brief, low smear of pale light on the southern horizon. For weeks, maybe even a month or two around the midwinter solstice, depending on how far north you live and the height of the surrounding mountains, The sun might not rise above the ridges at all. You live in a perpetual twilight, a world of grey shadows and flickering firelight. This is the brutal reality number 4, the profound psychological toll of the darkness, the boredom, the monotony, the confinement, the endless grey, featureless sameness of the days, stretching into weeks, then months. How do you fight it? How do you keep the spirits from sinking into a state of winter lethargy or despair? You connect, you communicate, you talk. The Longhouse in winter is filled with the sound of human voices. You tell stories, gathered closely around the warmth of the central fire, the flames reflecting in your eyes. You recount the old tales, passed down through generations. Tales of the gods, Odin the Allfather, wise and cunning, Thor the Thunderer, strong and impulsive, Freya, goddess of love and war. Tales of heroes, Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, Beowulf the monster fighter. Tales of epic battles, of treacherous voyages, of encounters with trolls and giants in the misty mountains. You recite poetry, long, complex, alliterative verses, memorized and performed with dramatic flair. Kennings, metaphorical compounds like whale road for the sea or battle sweat for blood, enrich the language, painting vivid pictures in the listeners' minds. Perhaps a male relative pulls out a musical instrument, a talharpa or a lyre, simple stringed instruments crafted from wood. He plucks or bows a droning, melancholic tune, a simple melody that fills the smoky air. You sing songs together, rough work songs remembered from the summer, boisterous drinking songs from past feasts, haunting ballads about loss and the sea. The shared act of creating sound, of telling stories, pushes back against the oppressive silence and darkness outside. You play games to pass the time and sharpen the mind. You have a board game, Anefatafel, often called King's Table. It is a game of strategy, played on a square wooden board marked with a grid. One player commands a central king piece and his defenders, surrounded by a larger force of attackers, commanded by the other player. The pieces are simple counters, carved from bone, wood, or antler. You hunch over the board in the dim, wavering firelight, your brow furrowed in concentration, plotting moves, anticipating your opponent's strategy, capturing pieces. It is a mental battle, a welcome distraction from the physical limitations of winter. You are actively maintaining the social bonds, the human connection, the shared culture that keeps the darkness, both literal and metaphorical, from consuming the household. And crucially, you have feasts, especially around the time of the midwinter solstice, Jol or Yule. This is the longest night, the darkest point of the year. It must be marked. It must be celebrated. Even with food supplies carefully rationed and dwindling, you make an effort. You might slaughter one of the precious pigs, saved specifically for this occasion, or perhaps an old goat or a sheep past its prime. This provides a rare, almost sacred opportunity for fresh meat, roasted directly over the glowing embers of the fire. The smell of sizzling fat, a welcome change from boiling fish. You brew stronger, darker ale for the occasion, using more of the precious barley. If the snow is not too deep, or if the fjord ice is solid enough to travel on, you might gather with your nearest neighbours. Perhaps you travel on simple long wooden skis, gliding over the snowdrifts, or wear wide, woven snowshoes made from branches and sinew to avoid sinking into the powder. Several households might come together in the largest longhouse, crowding the benches, sharing food and drink, reinforcing the bonds of community. You feast, you drink the strong ale, you boast about past exploits, successful harvests, profitable raids, feats of strength. You tell more stories, louder this time, fueled by the ale and the rare abundance of food. It is a brief, bright, noisy spark of warmth, light, and human connection deliberately ignited in the very heart of the frozen darkness. It is a necessary ritual, a defiant gesture against the cold, a collective prayer and promise that spring, eventually, inevitably, will come again. But the winter is not just boring and dark, it is intrinsically dangerous. The cold itself is a relentless, impersonal enemy. Simple survival requires constant vigilance. A misstep while checking animal traps set in the snowy woods, plunging a leg through a hidden crust into deep powder, can lead to difficulty getting back. A fall through weak ice on the fjord while attempting to fish through a hole means almost certain death from hypothermia in the freezing water. Getting caught outside, away from the shelter of the Longhouse, in a sudden blinding blizzard, a whiteout where snow and wind erase all landmarks, can be fatal within hours. You learn to read the weather signs, to respect the power of the cold. Frostbite is a constant, insidious danger. Numbness in fingers, toes, ears or nose can quickly lead to tissue damage. Losing fingers or toes to the cold is not just painful, it severely impacts your ability to work, to grip an axe, to weave, to mend nets. You dress in multiple layers. A base layer of wool, a thick wool tunic, perhaps wool trousers or leg wraps, thick wool socks, sturdy leather boots lined with felt or fur, wool mittens, a hood or cap, and finally a heavy, often hooded, wool cloak. Staying dry is absolutely crucial. Wet clothes, whether from melting snow or sweat during exertion, lose their insulating properties and can drain body heat with terrifying speed, leading to hypothermia. Sickness is another shadow that haunts the winter longhouse. Simple coughs and colds are almost constant, thanks to the smoky air, the damp conditions, and the close proximity to other people and animals. But more serious illnesses can spread like wildfire in the confined space. A fever, a persistent lung infection like pneumonia, virulent stomach ailments. Things that might be overcome more easily in the summer with access to fresh air and perhaps different foods, can rapidly become deadly in the weakened state induced by winter hardship. You rely on traditional remedies passed down through generations. Infusions made from dried herbs like yarrow or willow bark, poultices applied to chests or wounds. Astrid, like many women in the community, likely possesses considerable knowledge of local plants and their properties. Which ones might soothe a cough, which might help reduce a fever, which might staunch bleeding. But her pharmacopoeia is limited. Mostly, you rely on inherent toughness, on the body's own ability to fight back, and on luck. Accidents happen all too easily in the perpetual dimness and clutter of the longhouse interior. A slip of a sharp carving knife while working by the poor firelight. A serious burn from accidentally touching the hot cauldron or falling embers from the open hearth. A falling piece of firewood striking someone. Infection is an ever-present risk in the less than hygienic environment. A small cut, easily ignored in summer, can become dangerously infected if contaminated with dirt from the floor or animal manure. Without antibiotics, such infections can quickly fester, leading to raging fevers, the loss of a limb through desperate amputation, or death from sepsis. Life is undeniably fragile. You see it in the tragically high rates of infant and early mortality. You see it in the faces of the old ones who grow weaker as the winter progresses, their persistent coughs rattling in their chests as they huddle close to the fire. Winter is the time when the weak, the unlucky, and the unprepared are often culled from the community. It sounds brutal because it is brutal. It is the simple, hard, unsentimental logic of survival in a harsh, unforgiving land. And then comes the hardest time of all, late winter, perhaps February or March. The darkness begins to recede just a little. The days are noticeably, fractionally longer. But paradoxically, the coldest temperatures of the entire winter often hit now, in these final, desperate months. And the carefully hoarded food supplies. The food is running out. This is the notorious hungry gap. The period after the stored harvest has dwindled, but before the first new growth of spring appears. The barrels of salt fish hold only a few scraps at the bottom. The last piece of smoked meat was eaten weeks ago. The barley sacks are worryingly light, containing perhaps only enough grain for thin porridge, let alone for brewing more ale or making bread. Your own body feels the effects. You are thinner, weaker, your reserves depleted by the long cold and the inadequate diet. Your ribs might show beneath your tunic. The animals in their stalls are also suffering, gaunt and listless, surviving on meagre rations of dried leaves or poor quality fodder collected last summer. This is the time of real, gnawing, constant hunger. The bland barley porridge becomes even thinner, more watery, stretched with extra water to make it seem like more. You might indeed resort to desperate measures, stripping bark from certain trees like birch or elm, boiling it to make a barely edible, nutrient-poor soup. Digging under the snow for frozen tough roots or tubers that were missed during the autumn gathering. Every edible scrap is precious. Tempers fray easily within the crowded longhouse. The lack of sufficient food, the endless confinement stretching into another month, the constant, unavoidable proximity to the same faces, the same smells, the same irritations. It wears heavily on everyone's nerves. Small arguments and resentments, easily brushed off in summer, can flare into bitter quarrels. The forced community of winter survival can become deeply strained under the pressure of hunger and exhaustion. You look out the smoke hole at the grey, overcast sky. The snow outside is still deep, maybe crusted with ice now, offering no hint of the earth beneath. Spring, the return of warmth and life and abundant food, feels impossibly achingly far away. This is the final grim test of winter. Endurance. Sheer, stubborn, grit-your-teeth endurance. You tighten the belt around your tunic, literally to lessen the pangs of hunger. You pick up your carving knife and another piece of wood. You find a task to occupy your hands, your mind. You tell another story to the younger members of the household, huddled by the fire, perhaps a hopeful one about the sun's return. You wait. You conserve your energy. You survive. And then, one day, almost imperceptibly at first, something changes. You step outside into the cold air for a necessary task, fetching more wood, checking on the animals. And the air feels different. It is still cold, yes, but there is a subtle softness to it, a lack of the brittle, biting edge it held just weeks before. You pause, listening intently. You hear a sound you haven't heard in months. Drip. You look up. Water is slowly, steadily dripping from the snow-laden edge of the turf roof. The relentless grip of the frost is loosening. The snow is beginning to melt. The sun, when it peers from behind the clouds, feels fractionally, undeniably warmer on your face. A few days later, you hear another, more dramatic sound. The deep, groaning, cracking boom echoing across the fjord as the immense pressure of the thawing ice begins to break it apart. Dark leads of open water appear, widening day by day, shattering the white, unbroken expanse. And then, the birds return. First, perhaps, just a few hardy seagulls, wheeling and crying overhead, scavenging along the newly opened shoreline. Then other migratory birds, arriving on the strengthening southerly winds, their calls a sure sign that the land is waking up. The relief is almost overwhelming. It is a physical sensation, a loosening of tension in your shoulders you didn't even realize you were holding. You feel it in your bones, in your spirit. You have made it. Your household has survived another winter. You throw open the heavy Longhouse door, letting the pale, cool, fresh spring air flood into the smoky, stale interior, carrying the damp smell of thawing earth. You lead the thin, somewhat wobbly-legged animals out of their dark winter prison and into the muddy, thawing fields. They blink in the brighter light, stretching, perhaps even kicking up their heels in a brief show of liberation. The relentless work of spring and summer is about to begin. Mending fences, ploughing the heavy wet soil, planting the barley, repairing the boat, fishing, and it will be just as physically exhausting as ever. But it is work done under the returning sun. It is work fueled by the deep, primal hope that comes with the thaw. We think of Vikings primarily as warriors, explorers, fearsome raiders descending from the sea, and they certainly were all of those things. But that was, in many ways, the summer job, the winter job, the long, unglamorous, and far more fundamental task was simply survival. It was a protracted battle fought not with iron axes and shields against human enemies, but with carefully stored food, stacks of firewood, thick woolen clothing, and sheer, stubborn patience against the overwhelming forces of cold, darkness, and starvation. The harsh reality of the Viking winter was a long, dark, cold, smoky, often smelly, frequently hungry, profoundly boring, and undeniably dangerous endurance test that lasted nearly half the year. Their legendary toughness, their resilience, their ability to face hardship. It wasn't forged solely on the battlefield or the stormy northern seas. It was forged year after year in the dim, smoky firelight of the Longhouse, huddled together against the cold, telling stories, mending tools, and waiting, patiently, stoically, for the inevitable life-giving thaw. They were not just warriors of the summer seas. They were masters of winter. The shipbuilders who conquered the seas. We're diving into the Viking age again, but we're not sailing on the dragon ships. We're building them. We often picture the sleek longship cutting through the waves, a symbol of power and adventure. But who actually made these legendary vessels? We're heading to a noisy, messy, tar-smelling shipyard on the edge of a fjord to look at the brutal, back-breaking, and incredibly skilled reality of the Viking shipbuilders. If you've stayed with me through this first story, I'm glad it's brought you a moment of peace. If you'd like to help this little community of ours keep growing, a simple like or subscribe is always appreciated, and I'd still love to know where you're L. The year is roughly 870 AD. The place is a sheltered bay within a deep Norwegian fjord. You are Bjorn. You are not a warrior, not a jarl, not a skald reciting poems. You are a skipasmider, a shipbuilder, a master craftsman. Or perhaps you are still learning the trade, an apprentice under a master's watchful eye. Your world is not one of raiding and far-flung exploration, though your work makes those possible. Your world smells of fresh-cut wood, pine tar, damp earth, and the salty tang of the nearby fjord. It sounds like the rhythmic thump of mallets, the chop of axes, the grating shk of saws, and the constant murmur of the cold, grey water. You wake before the sun, in a simple timber longhouse not far from the shore. The air is cold and damp. Your breakfast is familiar. Barley porridge, maybe some dried fish. You pull on your rough woolen tunic and trousers, sturdy leather boots. Your hands are already calloused, hard as old wood, stained dark with tar and ingrained dirt. You walk down to the shore. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, you can see it taking shape. The skeleton of a new ship, laid out on the flat, grassy area just above the high tide line. It looks like the bleached ribs of some enormous sea creature. This is your work. This is your art. And it is brutal, demanding labour. The shipyard, the Skipperdrata, is not a grand, organised facility. It is simply a suitable stretch of coastline, perhaps near the mouth of a small river that allows for easier transport of timber. A few rough timber-framed shelters might stand nearby, housing tools, materials, and perhaps offering some respite from the wind and rain. Piles of wood shavings litter the ground like drifts of pale snow. Half-finished components, curved ribs, long planks, mast timbers, lie stacked, waiting. A fire pit smoulders, heating water or tar. It is a place of constant focused activity, driven by skill, tradition, and the relentless demands of the unforgiving sea. Your master, Sigurd, a man whose beard is grey but whose arms are still thick with muscle, is already there, examining the keel, the long, heavy backbone of the ship, laid perfectly straight on supporting blocks. He runs his hand along the T-shaped timber, his eyes narrowed, checking for flaws, for imperfections. The keel is the soul of the ship. It must be perfect. It is likely carved from a single massive oak trunk, chosen for its strength and straight grain. Finding such a tree, felling it, and shaping this crucial piece with only axes and adzes was the first monumental task, requiring immense skill and effort. Today's task begins, finding the right timber for the hull planks, the strakes. This isn't just a matter of grabbing any log. Viking ships, especially the sleek longships, relied on a specific technique called clinker building, where the planks overlap like shingles on a roof. This requires planks that are not only strong, but also flexible and relatively thin. And the best planks are not sawn, they are split. You and several other male workers head into the dense, damp forest that covers the steep slopes of the fjord. The air under the tall pines and oaks is cool and smells of damp earth and decaying leaves. You are searching. Not just for any tree, but for the trees. Tall, straight-grained oak trees, free of knots and twists. Finding a suitable oak is an art in itself. Sigurd scans the trunks, looking for the subtle signs of straight grain, judging the height and girth. When he finds one, the real work begins. You use iron axes, heavy, hafted tools, honed to a razor edge. The rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk echoes through the quiet forest as you and another man chop into the base of the massive trunk. It takes hours. Wood chips fly. Sweat runs down your back, even in the cool air. Finally, with a great groan and a tearing sound, the giant falls, crashing through the undergrowth, shaking the very ground. But it's not over. Now you must limb it, removing the branches. And then you must move it. This is the brutal reality number one, logistics. Getting a multi-ton oak log out of a dense, steep forest and down to the shore is a nightmare. You might use rollers made from smaller logs. You might use teams of oxen, if the terrain allows. You might simply use brute human force, levers, ropes, and a great deal of shouting and straining. Accidents happen. A rolling log can crush a limb. A misplaced step can send you tumbling down a slope. It is dangerous, exhausting work, performed far from the relative safety of the shipyard. You finally get the log to the water's edge, perhaps floating it downriver or along the fjord shoreline back to the Skipperdrata. and you need dozens of such logs. Back at the shipyard, the log must be transformed into planks. Sigurd directs the process. You do not simply saw the log into flat boards. That would cut across the wood grain, creating weak points. Instead, you split it radially, like cutting wedges from a cake. You use iron wedges and heavy wooden mallets. Beetles. You drive the wedges into the end grain of the log, following the natural lines of the wood.
Thump. Thump. Crack asterisk. The log groans and splits, yielding long wedge-shaped sections. This technique, riving, ensures the planks follow the grain, making them incredibly strong and flexible, even when thin. It is also incredibly wasteful. Perhaps only a fraction of the original log becomes usable planking. The rest is discarded or used for firewood.
Now you take one of the rough split sections. Your tool is the adze, a short-handled axe with the blade set perpendicular to the handle. You stand over the timber, legs braced, and begin to shape it. Chip, chip, chip. You swing the adze with controlled power, shaving off excess wood, smoothing the surface, tapering the thickness. This is skilled, dangerous work. One slip, and the razor-sharp adze blade can bite deep into your leg or foot. You work by eye, by feel, guided by years of practice, or by Sigurd's sharp commands. You are not following a blueprint. You are following a mental template, a tradition passed down through generations. You shape the plank, giving it the precise curve and bevel needed to fit snugly against its neighbours in the hull. The shaped planks, the strakes, must now be fitted to the keel and to each other. This is the heart of clinker construction. You start with the lowest strakes, the garboards, fitting them into grooves cut into the keel. Then the next strake is laid, so it overlaps the one below it by an inch or so. This overlapping seam is the key to the ship's strength and flexibility. But how do you join them? Not with glue, not with nails driven straight through. You use rivets, thousands of them. This is the brutal reality number 2, the sheer mind-numbing repetition. You must first drill holes through both overlapping planks. You use a simple but effective tool, a spoon auger, perhaps turned with a bow drill. Scree, scree. Then a male helper inserts a long soft iron nail with a square head from the outside. Inside the hull, you hold a heavy iron block, a dolly or clink yarn, against the protruding nail tip. The helper outside hammers the nail head tight against the wood. Clang, clang, clang. The nail pulls the two planks tightly together. Now you take a small hammer and you peen the protruding tip over a small square iron washer, a rove, flattening it, spreading it, locking it permanently in place. Tap, 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 tap. You do this thousands of times. Drill, insert nail, hammer tight, peen rivet, move 6 inches, repeat, drill, insert, hammer, peen. The air rings with a constant clang, 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 and tap, tap, tap. Your ears buzz. Your arm aches from hammering. You are not building a ship. You are assembling a massive wooden jigsaw puzzle with thousands of tiny metal stitches. Where does the iron come from? It might be smelted locally from bog iron, a difficult, fuel-intensive process. Or it might be imported, traded for furs or timber. Either way, it is precious. Every rivet represents a significant investment of labour and resources. As the hull grows, strake by overlapping strake, the ship begins to take its characteristic, elegant shape. But the planks need to curve, especially towards the bow and stern. How do you bend thick oak planks? You use heat and water. You might build a long, narrow, stone-lined trench filled with water, kept boiling hot with stones heated in a nearby fire. The long plank is submerged in the steaming water until the wood fibres become pliable. Or you might pack the plank with wet moss and build a fire around it, carefully controlling the heat to steam the wood without scorching it. When the plank is judged ready, soft, flexible, steaming, it is a race against time. You and several other men quickly pull the heavy, hot, wet plank from the steam box or trench. You rush it to the ship. Using ropes, levers, and brute force, you wrestle the plank into the required curve, forcing it against temporary frames or moulds. You hold it there, straining, shouting instructions, as it cools and sets into its new shape. It is hot, heavy, dangerous work. The steam scalds. The wood can splinter or crack if bent too far or too quickly. A ruined plank means wasted time, wasted resources. But when it works, it feels like magic. You've bent solid oak to your will. Once the whole shell is complete, a beautiful curved clinker-built vessel, it is still just a shell. It needs internal support. It needs ribs. You do not bend straight timbers into U-shapes. That would create weak points. Instead, you must find the shape. You go back into the forest, searching for trees that have grown with natural curves. Branches meeting the trunk at the right angle. Roots snaking in useful shapes. These are called grown crooks. Finding timbers with the perfect natural curve to fit the inside of the hull is another specialized skill. Once found, these curved timbers are carefully felled and shaped with axes and adzes to form the ribs, the spanter. They are fitted inside the hull, perpendicular to the keel, but they are not rigidly nailed or bolted to the planks in multiple places. That would make the hull too stiff, too brittle to withstand the twisting forces of the sea. Instead, the ribs are cleverly lashed to the strakes. You drill pairs of holes through raised cleats or knobs left on the inside surface of the hull planks during shaping. You then use tough, flexible bindings, perhaps spruce roots, split, soaked, and twisted into strong cords, to tie the ribs securely to these cleats. This allows the hull to flex, to work in heavy seas, absorbing the stress rather than breaking. It is a sophisticated, ingenious piece of engineering, developed over centuries. The basic structure is now complete. The keel provides the backbone, the overlapping strakes form the skin, the lashed ribs give shape and strength. Now, you must make it watertight. This is the brutal reality number 3, the messy, smelly, vital job of caulking. The overlapping seams between the strakes are not perfectly tight. You must fill the gaps. You take wool or animal hair. Often it is wool soaked in pine tar. You use a thin wooden mallet and a special caulking iron, a blunt, chisel-like tool. You carefully, painstakingly drive the tarred wool deep into the seam between each overlapping plank. Tap, tap, tap. You work your way along every single seam, from bow to stern, inside and out. It is slow, tedious work. Your fingers become coated in sticky black tar. And the smell, pine tar has a strong, pungent, medicinal smell. It gets everywhere. On your clothes, in your hair, under your fingernails. You smell of tar for months, but it is essential. Without proper caulking, the ship will leak. And a leaking ship, far from land, is a coffin. Once the seams are caulked, the entire hull, both inside and out, must be coated, paid with more tar, often mixed with animal fat or oil to keep it pliable. You heat the tar in a large iron cauldron over a fire until it is liquid and bubbling. You use mops made of rags tied to sticks, or perhaps brushes made from animal hair to slather the hot, black, sticky goo over every inch of the hull. It fills any remaining cracks. It preserves the wood from rot and marine borers. It makes the surface smoother for passage through the water. It is hot, messy, smelly work. You are careful not to splash the boiling tar on your skin. A serious burn is a constant risk. When finished, the ship gleams, dark and waterproof. Other specialists are at work too. One team shapes the mast, a tall, straight pine trunk, and fits it into the massive solid block of oak that serves as the mast step, the curling, located low down, directly over the keel, providing stability. Another crafts the long, heavy steering oar, the steerboard, from which we get the word starboard, and fits it to the right side of the stern. Oar ports might be cut into the upper strakes, simple holes with clever hinged covers to keep water out when not in use. Benches for the rowers are fitted, the dragon head perhaps, or other carvings for the prow and stern post, are meticulously shaped and may be painted with bright mineral pigments. Finally, after months, perhaps even a year or more, of relentless, skilled, dangerous labour, the ship is ready. It sits on the shore, gleaming with fresh tar, the wood smelling sharp and clean. It feels alive. It holds the sweat, the skill, perhaps even the blood, of dozens of men. The day of the launch arrives. The whole community gathers. Logs are placed under the keel as rollers. Thick ropes are attached. Everyone, men, women, older members of the household, puts their shoulder to the hull or pulls on the ropes. With shouts and cheers, the great vessel begins to move. Slowly at first, then faster, sliding down the prepared slipway, down the grassy bank, and into the cold, grey water of the fjord. It floats. It sits perfectly on the water, high and buoyant. A collective sigh of relief, then a roar of approval goes up from the crowd. Sigurd, the master builder, watches, his face unreadable, but you see the deep satisfaction in his eyes. Your ship, your creation, is alive. It is ready for the sea. It is ready to carry men to trade, to explore, to other things. You feel a surge of pride, quickly followed by exhaustion. You look at your tar-stained hands. You have built a legend. But mostly, you are thinking about the ache in your back and the fact that tomorrow you must start selecting timber for the next one. We see the Viking longship as a symbol of speed, of terror, of adventure, of an entire age. We marvel at its elegant lines, its seaworthiness, its historical impact, but we often forget the brutal reality behind the legend. These ships were not mass-produced. They were handmade, painstakingly crafted by skilled artisans using basic tools, immense physical effort, and generations of accumulated knowledge. The shipbuilders were the unsung heroes of the Viking Age, the quiet craftsmen whose dangerous, dirty, and demanding labour forged the very tools of conquest and exploration. They worked in cold, damp conditions, risked injury daily, and poured their lives into creating vessels that were both works of art and sophisticated pieces of engineering. The dragon ship sailed into myth, but it was built by ordinary men, with ordinary aches and pains, one plank, one rivet at a time. The warriors of the north, life in a longhouse. We're returning to the world of the Vikings, those legendary warriors of the north. We picture them on their longships, axes in hand, striking fear across the seas. But what about when they weren't raiding? Where did these tough, seafaring people actually live? We're pushing open the heavy wooden door and stepping inside the smoky, crowded, and surprisingly domestic heart of the Viking Age, the Longhouse. The year is around 950 AD. The place is a farmstead, a garda, somewhere along the coast of Norway, perhaps nestled in a fjord or overlooking a windswept bay. You are Eric, you are a Carl, a a free man, a farmer, maybe sometimes a sailor or a warrior when the season calls for it. But right now, your primary identity is defined by this place. This land, this building. The sea might be your road, but the Longhouse, the scully, is your anchor, your shelter, your entire world for much of the year. You stand outside in the grey light of late afternoon. The air is damp, carrying the salty tang of the nearby sea and the sharp scent of pine from the forests that cling to the steep hills behind your farm. Your longhouse dominates the small cluster of buildings, perhaps a separate cookhouse, a small smithy, a storage shed. It's a long, low, imposing structure, maybe 70 feet long, its walls built of thick, hand-hewn timber planks fitted tightly together, or maybe sturdy turf blocks laid over a stone foundation. Its most striking feature is the shape, slightly bowed outwards along its length, like the hull of a ship resting upside down. This isn't just aesthetics, it's engineering, designed to withstand the crushing weights of snow and the fierce gales that sweep in from the North Atlantic. The roof is thick turf laid over birch bark and wooden rafters, steeply pitched to shed rain and snow. In summer it might bloom with wildflowers. Now, in the cooling days of autumn, it's a shaggy brown pelt. There are no windows in the walls, just maybe a couple of small square openings high up near the roofline, possibly covered with translucent fish bladder or thin oiled parchment, letting in only a weak filtered light. A single heavy wooden door, perhaps painted with simple geometric patterns or protective symbols, faces the farmyard. Smoke curls lazily from one or two openings cut into the roof ridge, the only concession to ventilation. This isn't just a house. It's a fortress against the elements, a self-contained ark designed to carry its inhabitants through the long, dark voyage of winter. You push open the heavy door, it swings inward on sturdy wooden pivots or leather hinges, and step inside. The contrast with the outside world is immediate and overwhelming. First, the light, or lack thereof. After the grey brightness outside, the interior is profoundly dim, almost cave-like. Your eyes take a moment to adjust. The primary light source is the long central fire pit that are in, running down the middle of the main room. Flames leap and flicker, casting a warm orange unsteady glow on the immediate surroundings, leaving the corners and the high vaulted ceiling lost in deep shadow. Then the smell hits you. It's a thick, complex and utterly unique blend of scents. Wood smoke, pungent and acrid, hangs heavy in the air, stinging your eyes slightly. Underneath that is the smell of damp earth from the floor, the scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the aroma of whatever food is simmering in the cauldron over the fire. Perhaps fish stew or barley porridge. There's the faint, oily smell of wool and tallow, maybe the sharper tang of curing hides, and, depending on the season and the layout, possibly the warm, unmistakable, earthy smell of livestock, cows, sheep, housed in a separate section at one end. It is the dense, layered atmosphere of people and animals living in close, smoky proximity. Finally, the sound. The roar of the wind outside is muted now, replaced by the intimate sounds of the household, the steady crackle and hiss of the fire, the rhythmic clack-thud of a loom being worked by a female figure in the corner, the murmur of conversation, perhaps the cry of a younger member of the household, or the soft shuffling sounds of animals, if they are housed within. It's not quiet, but it's a contained, human soundscape, a stark contrast to the vast elemental silence or roar outside. You have entered the belly of the beast, the heart of the Viking home. It's not elegant, It's not pristine, but it is warm, at least near the fire, and it is alive. You move further inside, your leather boots padding softly on the packed earth floor of the central aisle. This floor is hard, worn smooth by generations of feet, perhaps slightly damp in places. Running along both long walls are raised platforms, constructed of timber planks supported by low posts. These platforms are perhaps 3 feet high and 6 or 8 feet wide, creating distinct zones within the open space. They serve as the primary living and sleeping areas, lifting people off the cold, potentially damp earth floor. The edges of the platforms might be decorated with simple carvings. The surfaces are covered with layers of insulating straw or bracken, and then perhaps with woven reed mats or thick, shaggy animal furs. Sheepskins, maybe even reindeer or bear hides, depending on your location and hunting success. During the day, these platforms are the household's workspace and seating area. You see your wife, Ingrid, sitting near the fire on one platform, her legs tucked beneath her, spinning wool into yarn with a graceful, practiced motion, using a drop spindle weighted with a small stone or clay whirl. Further down, an older female relative might be grinding barley for the evening meal, using a simple rotary quern. 2 heavy, circular stones, one turned by hand against the other, producing a coarse flour. On the opposite platform, an older male relative, perhaps your father or uncle, sits patiently mending a fishing net, his gnarled fingers expertly tying knots in the firelight. A younger male member of the household might be carving a piece of wood, shavings falling around his feet. At night, these same platforms transform into communal beds. You don't have separate bedrooms or private chambers. The entire household, you, Ingrid, any younger members, older relatives, maybe farmhands or even thralls, enslaved people, if your farmstead is wealthy, sleep side by side on these platforms. You simply lie down, perhaps with your head towards the wall and feet towards the central aisle, and pull heavy coverings over yourselves. Thick woolen blankets, felled. More furs. People likely slept fully clothed for warmth. Huddling together was not just customary. It was a necessary strategy for conserving body heat against the bitter night chill, especially during the deep winter months when the fire might be banked low to conserve fuel. Privacy, as we understand it, simply did not exist. Life was lived openly, communally, elbow to elbow. The structure overhead is impressive, even in the dim light. Massive, rough-hewn timber posts, perhaps whole tree trunks, rise from the earth floor to support the ridge beam high above. These posts divide the longhouse into bays or sections. The roof itself is supported by pairs of sloping rafters, creating a high, vaulted ceiling lost in the smoky darkness. From these rafters hang various useful items. Bundles of dried herbs for cooking or medicine, perhaps smoked fish or sausages, tools not currently in use, maybe even coils of rope. The smoke rising from the central hearth swirls up into this high space before, hopefully, finding its way out through the smoke holes. Over years, the wood of the rafters and roof timbers becomes blackened, hardened, and preserved by the constant coating of soot and creosote. It's unintentional wood treatment, courtesy of the chimneyless design. A design choice that might seem primitive, but reflects a world where conserving heat was far more critical than venting smoke perfectly. Every wisp of warmth was precious. Depending on the size and wealth of your farmstead, one end of the longhouse might be partitioned off, perhaps by a sturdy wooden wall or just a lower earthen bank, to serve as the byre or stable for the livestock during the harshest winter months. This section would have its own entrance and a lower floor, often with drainage channels dug into the earth. Keeping the animals, the cows needed for milk, the sheep for wool, the oxen for ploughing, alive through the winter was paramount. Housing them indoors protected them from predators and the worst of the weather, and made feeding and tending them easier when snow lay deep outside. The added benefit, of course, was their body heat. A dozen cows generate a surprising amount of warmth, and having them under the same roof, even in a separate section, would significantly raise the ambient temperature in the human living area. The downside, naturally, was the smell and the flies. But in a world where freezing was a real possibility, the smell of manure was likely considered a small price to pay for the shared warmth. It was a practical symbiosis, a huddle of humans and beasts against the cold. Work within the Longhouse is constant, especially during the long winter months when outdoor farming is impossible. Life is not idle, it simply shifts indoors. The warp-weighted loom is a central feature of many households. Ingrid, or another skilled female weaver, spends countless hours standing before this tall, vertical frame. Dozens of threads, the warp, hang down, held taut by heavy clay or stone weights dangling near the floor. She passes the weft thread back and forth on a shuttle, beating each line tightly into place with a wooden sword or beater. The clack-thud is a steady, hypnotic rhythm. She produces yards of the essential vadmal, the sturdy woolen cloth needed for clothing, blankets, and sailcloth. The entire process, from shearing the sheep to the finished cloth, happens within or around the farmstead. Washing the greasy wool in the cold fjord water, carding it with comb-like tools to align the fibres, spinning it into yarn using spindles, dyeing it with pigments derived from plants or minerals, and finally weaving it. It's a technology that requires skill, patience, and incredible amounts of time. Meanwhile, you and the other men are engaged in tasks suited to the firelight. Woodworking is essential. You might be carving intricate patterns onto a wooden chest intended to hold valuables, or shaping a new paddle for the small boats used for fishing in the fjord. Perhaps you are making or repairing wooden farming tools. Rakes, forks, handles for axes and scythes. Bone, antler, and horn are also valuable materials, carved into combs, gaming pieces, knife handles, or decorative pins. Leatherworking is another crucial indoor craft. Repairing shoes, stitching harnesses for oxen, making belts or pouches. Every man carries a knife, the sagas, not primarily as a weapon, but as an essential multi-tool for everyday tasks like these. Tools are maintained with meticulous care, axe heads sharpened on whetstones, iron fittings cleaned and oiled to prevent rust. Idleness is not valued. Constant useful activity is the norm. Every object is either made by hand or acquired through trade at considerable effort. Repairing and maintaining these objects is a fundamental part of life. Food preparation revolves around the central hearth. A large iron cauldron, or perhaps one made of soapstone, hangs from a chain or tripod over the flames. This is the heart of the kitchen. Into this pot goes, well, whatever is available. In winter, this usually means the staples: barley boiled into a thick porridge or stew, grota; dried or salted fish, perhaps cod or herring, soaked to remove the salt and then boiled, maybe with some hardy root vegetables like turnips or onions that have been stored in a root cellar or buried in the ground to prevent freezing. Smoked meat, mutton, goat, perhaps pork if the farm is prosperous, might be added to the pot for flavour and richness, though fresh meat is rare in winter unless a successful hunt brings in deer or elk, or an animal is slaughtered for a special occasion. Bread is typically a simple flatbread made from barley or rye flour, mixed with water and perhaps a little salt, cooked on a flat stone or iron griddle placed directly in the embers of the fire. It's hard, dense, and requires vigorous chewing. Dairy products are important too. Milk from cows or goats is drunk fresh when available, or cultured into skyr, a thick, sour, yogurt-like substance that can be preserved for months. Butter and simple cheeses are also made and stored. Ale, brewed from barley, is the common drink for everyone, likely weak and consumed in large quantities for hydration and calories. Clean water might be sourced from a nearby spring or river, or melted from snow or ice, but ale is often preferred for safety and nutrition. The diet is monotonous, heavy on preserved foods, lacking in fresh vegetables for much of the year, but it provides the necessary fuel to survive the cold and the labour. The long, dark evenings, especially during the deep winter, stretch for many hours. How do people fill this time? Confined together in the smoky dimness. They connect through shared culture. Storytelling is paramount. Gathered around the hearth, the flickering firelight illuminating faces, elders recount the ancient myths and legends, the creation of the world from the body of the giant Ymir, the exploits of Odin and Thor, the trickery of Loki, the prophecies of Ragnarok. Sagas, long prose narratives recounting the histories of families, the deeds of heroes, the settlement of Iceland, are recited from memory, preserving history and reinforcing social values. Poetry, intricate, alliterative, rich with metaphorical kennings, is performed, perhaps by a travelling skald, or by members of the household known for their skill with words. Music plays a role too, though instruments are simple. A carved wooden flute might pipe a simple melody. A talharpa, or lyre, small stringed instruments, might provide a droning accompaniment to songs or poems. Singing is common. Work songs, celebratory songs, laments. Board games provide entertainment and mental stimulation. Hanafatafel, King's Table, is popular, a complex game of strategy resembling chess, played with pieces of carved bone or wood on a marked board. Dice games, played with carved knuckle bones or wooden dice, offer simpler amusement and opportunities for gambling small items. These activities are not just pastimes. They are essential social glue, ways of maintaining community, sharing knowledge, and keeping spirits up during the long, oppressive darkness. They are the human response to the threat of isolation and despair. Life in the Longhouse is lived according to the seasons, but also punctuated by feasts and festivals. Midwinter, or Yule, Jol, is the most important. Marking the solstice, the longest night, it's a time for feasting, drinking, and rituals intended to ensure the sun's return. Animals might be sacrificed, their meat cooked and shared in a communal feast. Stronger ale is brewed. Neighbours might gather, reinforcing community bonds. Other festivals mark the agricultural calendar or honour specific gods. These celebrations are vital bright spots, moments of abundance and release in a life often characterised by hard work and scarcity. They reaffirm the connections between people, the land, and the divine forces believed to govern their world. Even in the depths of winter, these planned moments of communal joy provide hope and structure. Despite the apparent coziness, the Longhouse presents constant challenges. The cold remains a persistent enemy, seeping through walls, finding cracks. Keeping the fire fed requires constant effort. Dampness is pervasive, leading to mould and discomfort. Hygiene is basic at best. With people and potentially animals living in close quarters, waste disposal is rudimentary, often just carried outside and dumped, or perhaps collected in pits. Access to fresh, clean water can be difficult when sources freeze over. Washing bodies or clothes is an infrequent luxury, especially in winter. Lice and fleas are likely common companions. Sickness can spread rapidly in such conditions. Lack of sunlight for months on end can affect mood and health. Accidents involving fire, sharp tools, or unruly animals are always a risk in the dim, crowded space. Life is physically demanding, often uncomfortable, and carries inherent dangers even within the supposed safety of the home. As winter draws to a close, a palpable sense of anticipation fills the Longhouse. The first signs of spring, slightly longer days, the sound of dripping meltwater, the return of migratory birds, the cracking of fjord ice, are greeted with profound relief. The heavy door is opened more often, letting in the fresh, damp air carrying the smell of thawing earth. The animals are eventually led back outside, blinking in the stronger sunlight, eager for the first green shoots. The cycle begins anew. The Longhouse, having served its purpose as a winter sanctuary, now becomes a base for the frantic activities of planting, fishing, building, and sailing. The warriors of the north prepare once again to face the world outside. The Viking Longhouse wasn't just a dwelling, it was the crucible of Norse society. It was within these smoky, crowded yet resilient structures that families were raised, skills were passed down, stories were told, and the very fabric of their culture was woven. The harsh reality of life inside, the lack of privacy, the constant work, the battle against cold and darkness, the intimate proximity to both livestock and death, forged the toughness and adaptability that characterized the Viking Age. We remember the ships that sailed out from the fjords, but it was the Longhouse, the anchor on shore, that made those voyages possible. It was the home front, the center of resilience, the place where life endured, waiting for the return of the sun. The Storytellers of the Great Hall. We're heading back into the smoky, fire-lit world of the Viking or Anglo-Saxon Great Hall. But we're not focusing on the warriors feasting or the lords dispensing rings. We're turning our attention to the person standing near the high seat, instrument in hand, the one responsible for the entertainment, the storyteller, the scop, the skald. We imagine them as revered figures, weaving magic with words. But what was the reality of being the designated entertainer in a hall full of loud, potentially drunk warriors? Let's look at the harsh, demanding, and often precarious life of the storytellers of the Great Hall. The year is uncertain, perhaps 800 AD, perhaps 1000 AD. The place is a great timber hall, somewhere in Scandinavia or England. You are Wulfstan, or perhaps Torvald. You are a scop or a skald, a professional poet, a storyteller, a musician, a historian, an entertainer. And tonight, you have a gig. You stand near the entrance of the hall, the cold night air at your back, the roar of the feast already hitting you like a wave. Your instrument, a small, six-stringed lyre or harp, crafted from maple wood, held in a worn leather bag, feels familiar and heavy under your arm. Your throat is dry. The Great Hall is the heart of this society. It's the king's or jarl's residence, the courthouse, the banquet hall, the public meeting space, the barracks. Tonight, it's in full feast mode. You push through the heavy wooden door, perhaps covered in thick hides to keep out the draft. The immediate sensations are overwhelming. The heat, a blast of warmth from the long central fire pit, welcome after the outside chill. The smell, a thick, rich fug of wood smoke, roasting meat, spilled ale, damp wool, burning tallow, and dozens of unwashed human bodies packed together. And the noise, a deafening cacophony of loud talk, booming laughter, shouts, the clatter of wooden plates and drinking horns, maybe the barking of dogs under the tables. This is your stage, this chaotic, smoky, smelly, noisy room. You're not entering a hushed concert hall. You are entering a party, a loud one. Your job is to somehow cut through this wall of sound, capture the attention of these feasting warriors and their lord, and hold it, perhaps for hours, with only your voice, your instrument, and the power of your words. No pressure, right? You are essentially the human entertainment system in a world without electricity, tasked with performing intricate epic poetry for an audience that might easily get distracted by a fresh serving of pork or a drunken argument. You navigate through the throng. The floor is packed earth, perhaps strewn with rushes or straw, already littered with discarded bones, spilled food, and other debris. Dogs scavenge underfoot. The air is thick with smoke. The long fire pit down the centre has openings in the roof above, but much of the smoke lingers, stinging your eyes, making the high timbered ceiling almost invisible in the haze. Along the walls run long wooden benches crowded with men, warriors, retainers, farmers, clad in woolen tunics, drinking heavily from horns or wooden cups. Torches fixed to the wall posts sputter and smoke, adding to the general gloom and haze. At the far end, on a raised platform, the dais, sits the lord. He might be a king, a jarl, a powerful thegn. He sits in the high seat, often a more elaborately carved chair, flanked by his most trusted warriors and his wife. Before him is a heavy trestle table laden with food, roasted meats, bread, perhaps silver goblets. This is your target audience, your patron, the man whose favour and generosity determines whether you eat well tonight or at all. Your performance is not just art, it is a job interview conducted live in front of a rowdy crowd, with your livelihood on the line. The brutal reality number one. You are a freelancer in a very tough market. You find your designated spot, not on the dais, unless you are exceptionally favoured, but somewhere near it, perhaps on a slightly raised stool or chest, where you can be seen and hopefully heard above the din. You carefully unwrap your instrument. The lyre is small, perhaps U-shaped, with strings made of twisted gut. You run your fingers over them, checking the tuning pegs, the damp air, the heat from the fire. They can affect the pitch. You pluck a string. Twang. You adjust a peg. You need this to be perfect. Your instrument is your partner, the vessel for your music, the counterpoint to your voice. You wait. You are not the main event yet. The feast is still in full swing. Servants, perhaps enslaved people, thralls, move through the crowd, carrying platters of steaming meat, refilling drinking horns with ale or mead, from large wooden buckets or pottery pitchers. The noise level rises and falls in waves of laughter and argument. You observe the room. You gauge the mood. Are they boisterous? Sullen? Eager for a story? You need to read your audience. Choosing the wrong poem for the wrong mood could be disastrous, or at least unprofitable. You are also observing the Lord. Is he in a generous mood? Is he distracted? Who has his ear tonight? This is all part of the job. Social intelligence, political awareness. You are not just a poet. You are a courtier, in your own way. The brutal reality number 2, memory. You have no script, no sheet music, no teleprompter. Everything you perform, every poem, every song, every genealogical list, every historical account, is stored here, in your head. You are a walking library, a living hard drive of cultural knowledge. The epic poems like Beowulf or the Tales of Sigurd might run to thousands of lines. You need to know them all, not just the words, but the complex meter, the alliteration, the kennings, the rhythm. You need to be able to recall specific stories on demand, tailor your performance to the occasion, perhaps even improvise new verses praising your host or commemorating a recent victory. Your training began years ago, perhaps as an apprentice to an older Scot. You spent countless hours listening, repeating, memorizing, learning the vast stock of traditional formulas, themes and characters, learning the intricate rules of Norse or Old English versification. It is a demanding intellectual discipline, requiring a prodigious memory and a deep understanding of language and tradition. You are the guardian of the tribe's history, the keeper of its values, the voice of its identity. It's a heavy responsibility, carried entirely within your own skull. Forgetting a line, faltering in the middle of a well-known passage, is not just embarrassing, it's unprofessional. It could cost you your reputation and your next meal. Finally, a lull in the feasting. The initial frenzy of eating and drinking has subsided slightly. The Lord catches your eye. He nods. It is time. Your heart beats a little faster. You stand, or perhaps remain seated, holding your lyre. You strike a chord. A clear, resonant sound that cuts through the background murmur. Heads turn. Conversations pause. Slowly, a measure of quiet descends upon the hall, or at least the part nearest the dais. All eyes are on you. The firelight flickers on the faces. Bearded warriors, watchful women, the imposing figure of the Lord. The pressure is immense. You begin. Perhaps you start with a short instrumental prelude on the lyre, a simple evocative melody to set the mood. Then, your voice joins in, clear, strong, resonant, pitched to carry through the large, noisy space without shouting. You might begin with a shorter poem, a riddle, or a boast, something to capture their attention quickly. Or, if the mood is right, you launch directly into a major work, an epic tale of heroes and monsters, gods and giants. You chant or sing the verses, your voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the poetry, your lyre providing a sparse, percussive accompaniment, marking the beat, highlighting key moments. Tonight, you choose a story of the gods, perhaps the tale of Thor's journey to the land of the giants, a story filled with tests of strength, illusions, and cosmic humour. You describe Thor, mighty and impulsive, gripping his hammer Mjolnir, his red beard bristling. You describe his companions, Loki, the trickster, and the swift human servant Thjalfi. You paint a picture with words of the vast, strange hall of the giant Utgarda Loki. You feel the audience lean in as you describe the challenges. Thor trying to lift the giant's cat, which is actually the Midgard serpent in disguise. Thor trying to drain a drinking horn connected to the ocean. Thor wrestling with an old woman who is old age itself. You carefully frame these divine events through your telling. You do not state Thor lifted the serpent. You say, and listen now, how the thunderer strained, his knuckles white against the impossible weight of the grey cat that arched its back beneath his grip. You focus on the sensory details as perceived by the characters within the story you narrate. The booming laughter of the giants, the cold sweat on Thor's brow, the vastness of the hall. You are channeling the myth, making it present, making the listeners feel the awe, the humour, the tension. Their faces, lit by the fire, are rapt. You see them nodding, maybe murmuring lines they recognise. For this moment, the smoky hall is transformed. It is Utgarda Loki's fortress. The magic is working. But performing for hours takes a physical toll. Your throat becomes raw from projecting your voice over the noise. You take sips of ale or water between sections, trying to soothe it. Your fingers grow stiff and sore from plucking or strumming the gut strings of the lyre. You might be sitting on a hard, backless stool, your posture fixed for hours. The constant smoke irritates your lungs. The heat from the fire might be intense on one side, while your back remains cold. It is physically demanding work, requiring stamina and concentration. And the performance isn't just reciting words, it's about presence. You need to maintain eye contact with the Lord, with the key members of the audience. You use gestures, changes in tone, dramatic pauses to keep them engaged. You need to be aware of the room, ready to adjust your performance if attention starts to wander. If a fight breaks out at the far end of the hall, a common occurrence, you might need to raise your voice or perhaps subtly weave a comment about bravery or loyalty into your narrative, gently reminding the listeners of proper conduct. It's a delicate balancing act. The brutal reality number 3, patronage and politics. You are utterly dependent on the goodwill of your host. Your poems often serve a crucial social and political function, praising the Lord, celebrating his victories, flattering his lineage, legitimizing his power. You might be required to recite long, complex genealogies, tracing the Lord's ancestry back to gods or legendary heroes. Accuracy, or at least the accepted version of accuracy, is vital. Getting a name wrong or omitting a key ancestor could cause serious offence. You must choose your repertoire carefully. Reciting a poem about a rival lord's victory? Probably not a good idea. Singing the praises of a hero from a family currently out of favour? Risky. You need to be attuned to the shifting alliances, the simmering feuds, the delicate egos within the hall. Your words have power, and that power can be dangerous. A misplaced verse, an unintended slight, could lose you your patron, your welcome, even your safety. You're walking a political tightrope, armed only with a lyre and a good memory. Sometimes, the most important skill isn't the poetry itself, but knowing when to keep silent, or what praise to lavish upon the man holding the purse strings, or the spear. Competition can be fierce. You might not be the only storyteller vying for the Lord's attention. Another scop might arrive, perhaps one with a newer, more exciting repertoire, or one more skilled in flattery. You might find yourself in an impromptu poetry slam, a battle of wits and words, trying to outdo your rival in skill and cleverness, competing for the prize. A ring, a cloak, continued employment. Your artistic merit is constantly being judged, not by critics, but by the immediate reaction of your powerful, perhaps tipsy, audience. A lackluster performance might mean a meagre reward, or no reward at all. Finally, after hours of performance, you bring the epic tale to its conclusion. Your voice, though hoarse, delivers the final lines with practiced finality. You strike a concluding chord on your lyre. Silence hangs in the smoky air for a moment, then breaks into applause. Rough, hearty clapping, perhaps shouts of approval, the banging of drinking horns on the tables. The Lord on the dais nods, a rare smile perhaps touching his lips. He speaks, his voice booming over the renewed noise of the hall, praising your skill, your memory, the power of your words. And now, the reward. This is the brutal reality number 4. Payment is unpredictable and often symbolic. The Lord might gesture to his wife, who removes a gold or silver ring from her arm and hands it to a retainer to bring to you. Or the Lord himself might gift you a fine cloak, or perhaps a drinking horn inlaid with silver. These are valuable gifts, certainly, symbols of favour and status. But you can't eat a ring. You might also receive more practical payment, food, lodging for the night, perhaps a share of the feast's leftovers. Sometimes the reward is simply the promise of future patronage, the right to remain at the Lord's Hall for a time. Your status is ambiguous. You are respected for your skill, your knowledge, your connection to the sacred traditions. You dine in the great hall, closer to the high seat than the common farmers. But you are not a warrior. You do not own land. You live by your wits, your voice, your memory. You are dependent, vulnerable. A change in the Lord's fortune, or his mood, could leave you suddenly adrift, seeking a new hall, a new patron. You are, in many ways, an outsider, perpetually performing for your supper. The romantic image of the revered bard is tempered by the harsh reality of economic uncertainty. You have just held a hall spellbound with tales of gods and heroes, and your concrete reward might be slightly less stale bread tomorrow morning. The feast continues, the noise level rising again, but your part is done for now. You carefully wrap your lyre, protecting it from spilled ale or clumsy feet. You might find a quieter spot on a bench, gratefully accepting a horn of ale, letting the exhaustion wash over you. You watch the ongoing revelry, the drinking games, the boasts, the arguments. You listen, always listening, gathering new material, observing the dynamics, filing away details for future poems. Your work is never truly done. The world is your source material. Later, much later, when the fire has burned low and most of the hall's occupants have either staggered off to find a place to sleep or simply passed out on the benches or the rush-strewn floor, you find your own spot. Perhaps you are granted a place on the platforms near the dais, a mark of favour. Or perhaps you curl up in a quieter corner, wrapping yourself in your cloak. The air is thick and still smells of smoke and stale ale. The sounds are now snores, drunken muttering, the rustle of straw, the occasional bark of a dog. You close your eyes, the epic verses still echoing in your mind. You sleep the sleep of the utterly spent, knowing that tomorrow you may need to do it all again, in another hall, for another lord, weaving words for your survival. We look back at the scop or the skald and see a figure of romance, a keeper of ancient lore, a weaver of verbal magic. And they were all those things. But the brutal reality was also one of intense pressure, precarious dependence, and demanding physical and mental endurance. They performed in difficult conditions, relied on prodigious feats of memory, navigated complex social politics, and often received uncertain rewards. They were the artists, the historians, the entertainers, and the living libraries of their time, holding entire cultures within their minds. Their stage was the smoky, noisy, vital heart of their society, the Great Hall. And their performance was not just entertainment, it was the essential act of remembering, shaping, and transmitting the very identity of their people, one epic verse at a time. The farmers of the Frozen Fjords. We're venturing back to the Viking Age, but we're leaving the longships tied at the dock for now. We often focus on the raiding and exploring, the dramatic outward journeys. But who was keeping things running back home? Who actually produced the food that fueled those expeditions? We're heading into the steep, rocky landscape of coastal Norway to look at the brutal, relentless, and often thankless reality of the Viking farmer, the backbone of that fierce society. The year is around 850 AD. The place is a small farmstead, a garda, clinging precariously to a narrow strip of arable land beside a deep, dark Norwegian fjord. You are Leif. You are a carl, a free man, head of this household. Your status isn't measured just in silver arm rings gained overseas, but in land, this hard-won, grudging patch of earth, and in the livestock that grazes it. The sea laps just a stone's throw away, a constant presence, sometimes calm and grey, sometimes raging. Behind you, sheer cliffs rise, dark rocks streaked with waterfalls, their peaks lost in the ever-present mist. This dramatic landscape is mostly useless rock. Your world, your livelihood, is squeezed into the thin green ribbon between the water and the stone. It's late summer. The days, though still long, are beginning to carry a hint of the chill to come. The air smells of salt spray, damp earth, wood smoke from your Longhouse hearth, and the sharp scent of cut hay drying on wooden racks. This is the frantic season. The brief window between the last snowmelt and the first frost is agonizingly short here in the north. Everything must be done now. The barley in your small terraced fields is turning golden. The precious hay for winter fodder must be cut, dried and stored. Fish must be caught and preserved. Wood must be chopped. It is a race against the encroaching darkness. Your farm is modest, a sturdy timber longhouse, perhaps flanked by a smaller cookhouse, a byre for the animals, maybe a simple smithy if you're lucky. The fields are small, irregular patches, cleared painstakingly from the forest or built up on terraces held back by stone walls. The soil is thin, rocky, acidic. Farming here is not the gentle cultivation of rolling lowlands. It is a constant battle against gravity, against rocks, against the short growing season, against the encroaching forest. It is relentless, back-breaking work. You look at your hands, calloused, cracked, stained with earth and tar. These are not the hands of a warrior poet. These are the hands that feed the warriors. The fjord defines your existence. It is your main source of protein. Fish, seabirds, sometimes seals, or even small whales. It is your highway, connecting you to neighbours scattered along the coast, to the larger trading posts where you might exchange surplus wool or hides for iron tools or pottery. Your small boat, a fairing perhaps, rowed by 4 oars, bobs at its mooring by your simple wooden jetty. It's essential for fishing, for travel. But the fjord is also a source of danger. Sudden storms can whip the water into a frenzy. Hidden rocks can tear the bottom out of a boat. The cold water offers little chance of survival if you fall in. You respect the fjord. You depend on it, and you fear it. Look at your fields again. Clearing this land was the work of generations. Your ancestors perhaps felled the ancient pines and birches that once covered this slope. They levered out the massive boulders left by retreating glaciers, using wooden poles and sheer muscle power, rolling them to the edges to form the rough stone walls that border your plots. They broke the thin, stony soil with primitive wooden ploughs. Ards, perhaps pulled by a precious ox, or even by human strength if you lack draft animals. This wasn't a one-time effort. Every spring, new stones heave up through the soil, pushed by the frost. Every year, saplings try to reclaim the edges of the fields. Clearing and maintaining the land is a constant, ongoing struggle. It's less farming, more permanent, low-level warfare against the landscape. The crops you grow are limited by the harsh climate. Barley is the king, hardy, relatively fast-growing. Oats might also tolerate the conditions, maybe some hardy rye. Wheat, forget it. That's a luxury for southern lands. You might also have a patch of tough root vegetables, turnips perhaps, and maybe some hardy greens like kale. Yields are low. A single bad summer, too cold, too wet, too dry, can mean disaster. Crop failure means a winter of desperate hunger, maybe even starvation. There is little margin for error. You watch the ripening barley sway in the wind, your heart tight with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Will it be enough this year? You walk towards the rough pasture clinging to the hillside above your fields. This is where your livestock spends the summer months. Your animals are not plump, placid beasts. They are hardy survivors, adapted to the sparse grazing and harsh conditions. You have a few small, tough cows, essential for milk, which provides butter, cheese, and the cultured skyr that forms a vital part of your diet. Calves might be slaughtered for meat in the autumn, but adult cows are too valuable as milk producers to eat regularly. They are your walking dairy. Then there are the sheep, shaggy, multi-horned creatures, perhaps resembling modern Icelandic or Spelsau breeds. Their fleece is thick, oily, providing the crucial wool, ull, that your wife, Astrid, will spin and weave into the warm vadmal cloth needed for clothing and blankets. Wool is perhaps your main cash crop, something you might trade for goods you cannot produce yourself. The sheep also provide milk, and lambs offer a source of meat in the autumn slaughter. They are tough animals, capable of finding grazing on the steepest, rockiest slopes, but they still need care and protection from predators like wolves or eagles. Goats might complete your small herd, even hardier than sheep, able to browse on shrubs and tough vegetation that other animals reject. They provide milk, meat, and hides. You might also have a few pigs, allowed to forage in the woods for acorns and roots during the summer, then perhaps fattened on scraps before the autumn slaughter. And chickens, hens, scratching around the farmyard, providing precious eggs and the occasional small meal. Every animal plays a role. Every animal represents a significant investment of time and resources. Losing an animal to sickness, accident, or predator is a serious blow. The biggest challenge with livestock in this environment is winter fodder. The summer grazing season is short. You cannot leave your animals outside to fend for themselves when the snow lies deep and the grass is buried. You must provide food for them for 5 or 6 long months. This means hay. Making hay is one of the most critical, labour-intensive tasks of the late summer. You must cut every patch of usable grass, not just in your home fields, but perhaps in remote mountain pastures, seaters, that you might move the animals to during the summer months. You cut the grass with iron scythes, long, curved blades swung with a rhythmic motion that takes skill and stamina. Once cut, the grass must be dried. You spread it out on the ground, turning it frequently with wooden rakes or forks to ensure it dries evenly in the unreliable northern sun. Or, more likely, in this damp climate, you hang it over wooden racks, hesje, allowing the wind to blow through it. Rain is your enemy. Wet hay will mould and become useless, even dangerous, for the animals to eat. You watch the sky constantly, ready to rush the drying hay under cover if a shower threatens. Finally, when it is judged perfectly dry, brittle, fragrant, the hay is gathered and stored, packed tightly into the barn section of your longhouse, or into separate hayricks, protected from the elements. You need a mountain of hay to keep your few animals alive until spring. It's a huge gamble, entirely dependent on the summer weather. A wet summer means poor hay. Poor hay means weak animals, or fewer animals surviving the winter. Farming alone cannot sustain you in this landscape. The sea and the surrounding wilderness are essential supplements. Fishing is a daily or near-daily activity for much of the year. You take your small boat out into the fjord. Perhaps you use handlines with hooks baited with mussels or smaller fish. Or maybe you work with neighbours to set nets across narrower sections of the fjord or near river mouths. hoping to intercept runs of herring or cod. The fjord is deep, cold, and often unpredictable. The weather can change in minutes, whipping up steep, dangerous waves. Fog can descend, leaving you lost and disoriented. Fishing is vital, but it carries constant risk. Every time you push off from shore, you are making a small wager with the sea god, perhaps Egger or Ran. Hunting provides occasional but valuable additions to the diet. You might track deer or elk in the high forests, perhaps using a simple bow and iron-tipped arrows, setting snares for smaller game like hares or birds. Ptarmigan, grouse, might offer more regular, if smaller, returns. Hunting requires skill, patience, and intimate knowledge of the terrain and animal behaviour. It also takes you away from the farm, sometimes for days, potentially into dangerous, unfamiliar territory. Getting lost, injured, or caught in bad weather far from home is a real possibility, and success is never guaranteed. Gathering plays a role too. In spring and summer, you collect seabird eggs from cliff ledges, a perilous task. You gather wild berries, blueberries, lingonberries, cloudberries, from the hillsides in late summer, preserving them by drying or storing them in water. Edible mushrooms, mussels, and other shellfish from the shoreline at low tide, even certain types of seaweed, all contribute to the larder. Nothing the land or sea offers is overlooked. Survival depends on exploiting every available resource, however small or difficult to obtain. You are not just a farmer, you are a fisher, a hunter, a gatherer, a generalist of survival. With the short growing season and the long winter looming, preserving the food you manage to produce or catch is absolutely critical. Decay is the enemy. Summer's abundance must be made to last through winter's scarcity. Fish is a prime candidate for preservation. Vast quantities of herring or cod caught during seasonal runs are gutted, perhaps split open, and then either heavily salted in large wooden barrels or hung to dry on wooden racks. Gel, exposed to the constant wind and cool air. The resulting salt cod or dried stockfish becomes tough, leathery, almost indestructible, and a staple protein source that will last for months, even years, though it requires extensive soaking before it can be eaten. Meat from the autumn slaughter, perhaps sheep, goats, or a cow culled from the herd, is also preserved. Smoking is common. Sides of meat are hung high in the rafters of the Longhouse, or in a separate smokehouse, slowly cured by the pungent wood smoke, which imparts flavour and acts as a preservative. Meat might also be salted, packed in barrels with coarse salt, or dried into thin strips, like jerky. Butter, churned from summer milk, can be heavily salted and packed into wooden tubs, sometimes buried in bogs for long-term storage. Cheeses are made, pressed and aged. Grain, the precious barley and oats, must be kept absolutely dry to prevent mould, stored in wooden chests or clay-lined pits, guarded against rodents. Root vegetables like turnips might be stored in cool, dark root cellars, dug into the earth, or simply buried in trenches below the frost line. This work of preservation occupies much of the late summer and autumn. It is a constant race against time, against decay, against the coming cold. Every fish salted, every side of meat smoked, every sack of grain stored securely is a small victory against the looming threat of winter hunger. It is repetitive, often smelly, demanding work. Your hands are perpetually stained, chapped from salt brine, smelling of smoke and fish. But the sight of the well-stocked larder, the barrels full, the rafters hung with meat, brings a deep, if temporary, sense of security. You have done your part. Now, you must hope it is enough. Life in the fjord is both communal and isolating. Your farmstead might be one of several clustered in a small area, forming a loose community, a bygd. You rely on your neighbours. You might share resources, perhaps pooling labour for the harvest, or collectively owning a particularly large or specialised tool. You might share a boat's landing, or grazing rights in the mountain pastures. Social connections are vital for mutual support, for defence, for arranging marriages. Gatherings for seasonal festivals, weddings or funerals are important occasions, reaffirming bonds. The Thing, the local assembly where free men meet to settle disputes, make laws and conduct business, is a cornerstone of your society, even if attending means a long boat journey. But the geography itself imposes isolation. The steep cliffs and dense forests make overland travel difficult, often impossible. The fjord is the main highway, but travel by boat is dependent on weather and season. In winter, when the fjord freezes, you might be completely cut off from the outside world for months, save perhaps for travel on skis or snowshoes over the mountains. Arduous and dangerous. News travels slowly. Your world can feel very small, bounded by the familiar landmarks of your own fjord, the rhythms of your own farm. You are self-reliant by necessity. You must be able to build your own house, repair your own tools, grow your own food, defend your own family. There is no central authority nearby to call upon for help. Freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. And then, inevitably, winter arrives. Not as a gentle transition, but often as a sudden, dramatic shift. A fierce storm blows in from the north, carrying snow. The temperature plummets. The fjord begins to freeze. The last of the migratory birds depart. A deep silence settles over the land, broken only by the howl of the wind or the crack of freezing timber. Outdoor farming work ceases completely. The fields lie dormant under a blanket of white. The focus of life shifts entirely indoors, into the Longhouse. But this is not a time of rest. As described before, the winter months are filled with indoor labour, maintaining the fire, tending the animals now housed inside, repairing tools, weaving cloth, carving wood, preserving and rationing the stored food. The farmer's work never truly ends. It merely changes form. The skills needed for winter survival are different. Patience, foresight, meticulous maintenance, the ability to endure confinement and boredom. You might spend days crafting a new wooden rake for the spring haying, or patiently spinning wool while snowdrifts pile high against the door. Every task performed now is an investment in the future, a preparation for the eventual return of the sun and the frantic work of the growing season. The farmer inside the winter longhouse is still working the land, just in a different way, ensuring the tools, the clothing, and the people themselves are ready when the land calls again. The most difficult period is often late winter, the time sometimes called the hungry gap. February, March, even into April. The initial stores laid down in autumn are severely depleted. The salted fish barrels might be empty, the grain sacks nearly so. The hay for the animals runs low, and they grow thin and weak. Your own family feels the pinch. Rations are cut smaller, the porridge becomes thinner. Hunger might become a constant dull ache in the belly. People grow weaker, more susceptible to sickness. The stored root vegetables might start to sprout or rot. You might resort to foraging for anything edible. Shellfish exposed by extreme low tides, perhaps, or even boiling nutritious lichens scraped from rocks if desperation sets in. This is the time when the careful planning and hard work of the previous season are truly tested. Did you store enough? Did you preserve it properly? Was the harvest sufficient? It's a period of intense anxiety, masked by stoicism. Tempers can fray easily in the still crowded longhouse, fueled by hunger and the dregs of winter confinement. Yet it is also a time when the first tentative signs of spring might appear. The days growing noticeably longer, the sun feeling slightly warmer, the first birds returning. Hope mixes with the lingering hardship. You scan the hillsides daily, desperate for the first patches of green, for the final breakup of the fjord ice that signals the return of abundant fishing. This final stretch requires the most endurance, the deepest reserves of patience. And then, finally, undeniably, spring arrives. The snow melts, first in patches, then in floods, swelling the rivers and waterfalls that cascade down the cliffs. The fjord ice breaks up with loud groans and cracks, clearing the way for boats. The first brave green shoots appear on the south-facing slopes. Migratory birds arrive in noisy flocks. The air softens, carrying the smell of damp earth and new life. The relief is palpable, a collective exhalation after months of holding on. The longhouse door is thrown open wide. The surviving animals are led out into the muddy, reviving pastures. But there is no time for leisurely celebration. The arrival of spring signals the immediate, urgent start of the next cycle of intense labour. The fields must be cleared of stones heaved up by the frost. The heavy, wet soil must be ploughed. A back-breaking task with oxen or by hand. The precious barley seed, saved from last year's harvest, must be sown. Fences must be mended. Fishing nets repaired over the winter are now put to use. The boat needs checking, perhaps retarring. The race against time begins anew. The farmer of the Frozen Fjords has survived another winter. But survival means plunging straight back into the relentless toil that makes life possible in this demanding yet breathtaking landscape. The image of the Viking often focuses solely on the warrior sailing away from the fjord. But the foundation of that society, the engine that powered the ships and fed the fighters, was the farmer, the men and women who clung to those narrow strips of land, who battled the elements year-round, who mastered the arts of cultivation, animal husbandry, and food preservation in one of Europe's harshest climates. They were the bedrock. The brutal reality of their lives was one of constant grinding labour, low yields, high risks, and a deep, necessary resilience. They weren't just living off the land. They were locked in a perpetual, intimate struggle with it. Their success was measured not just in harvests gathered, but in winters survived.